Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the show where we examine important issues either misrepresented or ignored in the mainstream narrative. Hi there, I'm Nigel Howitt, and on the show today, it's a great pleasure to welcome Ben Lowrey, an old friend and a man who is knowledgeable on all aspects, I think, of the current context, but also has some experience with the common law. And I'm really looking forward to talking to him about this and some of the pitfalls, the limitations, perhaps some myths around that. Ben, thank you for taking the time to join me today, mate, and welcome to the show.
Hello, Nigel. I was just looking back on my own podcast, and we did an episode 2 years ago. Can you believe that? That was 2 years ago when we spoke.
It seems so much has happened since then. My goodness, but yeah, goodness, that was great fun. It's good to be talking to you again, Ben. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think we're going to get into the nitty gritty, but I think, I listen to your podcast. I admire the stuff, and you always steer, you have a range of different guests on, but you always steer it towards the rational and the critical thinking. And I really appreciate that because, I try and do the same. And I think we've got a real opportunity to sort of try and steer. It's not like we know everything, but try and steer people away from some of the pitfalls that I know both of us have fallen into in the past, and try and steer people, just towards the things that are going to be more effective in fighting for freedom.
Absolutely. And I mean, so to put this in some sort of context, here we are in the middle of this alleged pandemic still, 15 months in. People are starting to think about freedom. They have been for over a year now. And there's been a bit of a revival, hasn't there, in the sort of free man movement of 10 years ago plus, sort of 2008. Back then, there was an interest in the concept of finding freedom sort of within the financial system. Would you agree, Ben? There was a general interest in the free man thing, and obviously this is resurfaced and it's being re-looked into in the light of the current context.
Yeah, there's people listening to this. There's a lot of talk at the moment about common law and also natural law and a few of the other variations. The straw man and the Magna Carta, and there's all these little offshoots and subcategories, which is great. And I don't want to come across to people as being overly negative and cynical. There's a lot of good stuff going on. There's a lot of community coming together, people questioning their relationship to the government, people questioning what is freedom, why does the government have the right to tell me to stay home and close my business and stuff like this. And I admire all that, and I love all that. There's a lot of positivity and all that. But when it comes to some of the theories about common law, sending off letters, conditional acceptances, affidavits, I think people have got to be careful that they're not wasting their time with that, potentially getting themselves in trouble. My story. I experimented. I lost my driving license. I went bankrupt. I tried a load of different.
Yeah. Before we get into that, because I'm really keen to examine your story, but before we do that, let's acknowledge that people are looking for a solution, aren't they? People are looking for a political solution specifically. Let's really name it. It's a political solution because it's our political freedom that's being taken away, not being able to go hither and thither, not being able to get together and walk around without a mask on. I mean, this is just outrageous intrusion into our way of living on the back of no evidence. If anyone really does care to dig and find the evidence, to satisfy their own curiosity, they will draw a blank. And so we're in this shocking situation where it's a real wake up call to see that it's like beep, 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 communist state. We're in a communist state. Warning, the state has assumed complete control. And people are looking for solutions. They're looking for a political solution. And they're coming to this common law technology, should we call it, collection of ideas. And maybe they've got a bit of a sort of magic bullet sort of way of looking at it. Do you think there's anything in that, Ben?
Let me turn the question back on you a little bit. I know I'm on your show, but do you think the methods that people are using are going to be effective, or does it concern you in the same way that it concerns me? I mean, how do you see it?
I do see it as a dangerous red herring because ultimately, I think you and I have both discovered through experience some 10 years ago or thereafter, and we can talk about these, that ultimately the state is a big beast. And if we have to be realistic about the idea of pitching ourselves against the state, and we have to realize that it's just never going to work. You know, the whole agenda is about political control. If we zoom right out, and if we look at the manifestations of this agenda in Agenda 21, the published stuff, you know, if we look at, you know, that there's plenty of evidence that there are many public institutions in the world that want global governance. We're moving towards more and more government, you know, the sort of Chinese model. Track and trace. We're in quite a severe political crisis. People are looking for technologies that will help, and I think really the state is too powerful to be reckoned with. And whatever it is we need to do, I don't think messing around with some paperwork with some finely crafted words in the right color ink, stamped by the right seal, is really going to make any difference, because we're dealing against a massive aggressive force that isn't going to respond to reasoning.
I know me and you learned to think in terms of the non-aggression principle a long time ago, and I think a lot of people that are new to this stuff, I think this would be a great opportunity for them to think along these lines as well. You've really got to think who is actually initiating violence against peaceful people. Now, it's not actually the politicians. Boris Johnson isn't actually making anybody do anything. It's actually the police on the ground. The willingness to initiate force against peaceful people actually lies with the police. They're the ones that come and arrest you. They're the ones that come and, you know, if you don't pay the fine, they'll come and get you. They'll take the stuff away. They'll drag you away. So it's very black and white, but really we want human interactions to be consensual, and everybody understands that word consensual, because you usually hear it in the sense of sexual assault, rape, unwanted sexual attention. Everybody understands the word consensual, but we need to think of all human interactions as ideally being consensual, and any interaction with the state is non-consensual. That's by the very nature of law. Law is mandatory. Law is, I mean, you don't get a choice, do you? We don't get to opt out of any laws. And there's some fuzzy thinking around this, because people sort of hold the belief that we're governed by consent, and this sounds nice, and we should be governed by consent, but in
but of course we're not. Yeah. Of course we're not. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there with mentioning the non-aggression principle, because that's where everyone's sort of implicitly coming from. And we have to remember that we've never been free. It's really important to not harp back towards Magna Carta, I think, and any of these previous signings, treaties, arrangements, paperworks. Because we've never really been free, whether under king, you know, and now or monarchy and our current form of government. We have to acknowledge that we've not yet achieved freedom. We've been granted some degrees of it, and that seems to be shrinking rapidly at the moment. But we haven't come from a history of being free, and I think that is important to remember. There's nothing to hark back to with the common law. I mean, there are some good principles, and in as much as the common law embodies or elements of the common law embody the non-aggression principle, of course they're spot on. But I agree with you that the non-aggression principle is really where to focus.
Yeah, I think so, and I agree. We've never been, and we do have varying degrees of freedom in different aspects of our lives. You know, on the most part, we're fairly free. Of course, you know, I can walk out of my house, I can walk down the street. You know, so we're free to an extent, but that, you know, in the last year we've really tasted what is, you know, what happens when the government flexes its muscles, and I don't think it really came to as a shock to us, because we've already been thinking along these lines a long time. But I think a lot of, you know, people that haven't really thought about their relationship to government, it came as a shock to everyone. You know, when the government or the people in power decide that you're not leaving your house, they've got the power to do it, and the police will do as they're told, and you know, and half the population will be complicit with it, and they'll just say, oh, the police are just doing their job, they just need to feed their family as well. And it's like, wow, now I see how Nazi Germany happened. Everybody was fully happy to go along with it, you know, without now I can see it. You know, it
was all legal at the time, wasn't it, Nazi Germany? I see. I think I'd even question the degree to which we're freedom, the degree to which we enjoy freedom, because again, and let's get into our various experiences of 10 years ago, because mine when I went through a challenge with the UK court system and government, basically trying to reason with the government, in short, over the issue of jurisdiction. Do I have the right to live on my own land or not? Quite a fundamental issue. If I'm free, I should have that right. And if I don't have that right, then clearly I'm not free. And that really was the issue that I entangled with the court system over. But I found that ultimately I couldn't be heard. They wouldn't listen to me at all. The system was designed to not hear my case. So again, it comes down to sort of, I learned to sort of pick battles, really, to appreciate that you can't reason with an invading army. You can't reason with a bunch of gangsters. You know, if the mafia are on your back and you've got to pay them rent, reasoning with them isn't going to cut it. It's just not going to. And yeah, anyway, I'm waffling on a bit. Let me back.
No, it's okay. I'm curious to know your thoughts on the current events, the current rallies, and the grassroots movements that are kind of bubbling up. There's all kinds of communities. There's the stand up. What's it called? Stand up on a Sunday or something. I've managed to. I keep meaning to go, and I keep missing them. But people get together on a Sunday at 10 a.m. I think all over the country, and
I'm not finger on the pulse with all this, but it is good to hear that things are moving, and obviously, you know, encouraging numbers going up in recent London protests and other cities around the country. But do you know what my feeling, Ben, is that it's all rather little too late, because when you see what's happened, when you walk into any supermarket and you see everyone wearing a mask, and when you bear in mind the, you know, real massive lack of resistance to these sweeping powers that government have taken, I can't help thinking that it is too little too late. And my sort of what I would call it a realistic appraisal of the situation is reinforced by conversations with relatively learned members of society. You know, I spoke to a businessman recently. I spoke to a lawyer, and, you know, thinking men, and I'm trying to convince them that there's no evidence for this alleged pandemic when you go to the fundamentals. And even the lawyer who understands about, arranging evidence to make a case that makes logical sense and that can result in a prosecution, even he was I couldn't pique his interest sufficiently to say, look, if you scratch a little bit here, you know, you can really find out that this is all bogus and that in fact a political agenda is being rolled out.
Well, we can see all the topics that they ban and remove from the internet, and it's anything that's critical of the vaccine, anything that questions COVID. So you can infer, without even knowing on what's going on behind the scenes, because we may not ever know, but you can infer that something's up just by what you're not allowed to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the vaccine issue has probably been the hottest topic, in recent years before the COVID thing. And interestingly, things like MMS, master mineral solution, it was called. It's in fact something called chlorine dioxide, a benign, very interesting compound which would do well in everyone's medicine cabinet. Frankly, it's a very, very useful thing. Massive resistance to finding out about this stuff, really suppressed, which is quite interesting, and also, as you said, challenging the vaccine issue, and now even, you know, if you talk about challenging germ theory or the lack of any isolated viral sample of the, you know, SARS-CoV-2 virus, you know, these things get censored out as well. It's quite scary, isn't it, Ben, seeing the degree to which, you know, things can be removed, you know, from social media and the narrative controlled.
Oh yeah, there's already public intellectuals and philosophers that we can't listen to because they're already removed. You know, Stefan Molyneux's removed from YouTube, and okay, he's on other platforms, but, you know, how long will that last? I don't know. I'm trying to think of, you know, Alex Jones' InfoWars is removed from YouTube and Facebook, etc. So we can still find these people, but it is worrying. It is scary. And doctors and virology experts that you might be able to catch their video for a few hours or a few days until it gets removed. It's not good. It's not good.
So Ben, tell us about your experience, because we both heard about this common law stuff. You know, I don't know, what was it, 2009, something around then. Tell us your route in and what you got interested in.
Right. So I think it must have been around about 2008, 2009. I started hearing this stuff about common law and free man on the land on the internet. And I was back in the day, I was listening to Robert Bernard and John Harris and, you know, a couple of others. And my experiment, I decided I was going to test this out. And they were saying, you've got the right to travel and you don't need a driver's license. If you've got a license, then you've submitted and you've given your consent and all that kind of thing. And you've got and as long as you assert your right correctly, then they can't touch you, you know, kind of thing. So I thought, right, I'm going to give this a go. I got a kid's scrambler. It was a few £100. And I thought, I'm going to put my own number plates on it. It's going to say that I'm private and I'm sovereign and all this language. And I knew I was going to get arrested. I mean, you know, so what I did, I clipped a camera to my shirt, I clipped one on the motorbike, and I went driving around Bristol, you know, and I'd rehearsed all these lines that I'd heard on the internet, all this stuff about sovereignty and private and common law, and I got arrested, and I gave them my paperwork, you know, my various affidavits and conditional acceptances. I can't remember what it was now, but yeah, you know, they seized the bike. I got arrested. I got a fine. I didn't pay the fine. Now, when you don't pay the fine, they summons you to court. If you don't go to court, they issue an arrest warrant. If you don't submit and turn yourself in, they'll come and get you. That's what happened. Yeah. They came and got me one day, took me to court, put me in front of the judge. I started arguing with the judge and telling him I was sovereign and I'm private and I don't consent.
Were you kidnapped effectively then? Were you taken from home?
Yeah, I was arrested. Yeah, I was arrested twice. On the day when I was actually on the bike, that was the first time. Yeah. And then when you don't respond to the paperwork and don't pay the fine and all that, then you eventually get in another arrest warrant. This is because anything to do with the road and cars and stuff is on the criminal side, so it gets dealt with magistrates. Mm-hmm. You know, and if you don't respond to the criminal side, they will come and get you. That's the difference with debts and credit cards and stuff, because if you don't respond to them, they'll probably just give up, you know. Yeah. But when you're dealing with the government, they will come and get you. This is the shock that people get when they try and challenge their council tax and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, so it's important that people understand this. Anyway, so I went to court. They took me to court. I argued with the judge and told him I'm sovereign and private and I don't consent and all that. And so he gave me 28 days contempt of court, straight to prison for arguing. Now, luckily for me, because I was only there on an unpaid fine, even though I was in prison, I was able to pay the fine and they let me go. So I was in there for 2 nights. After 2 nights, I'd had enough. And the fine had escalated to about £800, I think, something like that. And I didn't know this, Nigel, but each night you're in prison, the fine, you're effectively paying down the fine with each day that you serve your term. Mm-hmm. So after 2 nights, it had reduced to 680 or something. I can't remember. Anyway, so somehow I managed to pay the fine and they let me out after a couple of nights. Thank God. I would have been in there for 2 weeks, and it doesn't sound like that long, but when you're in there, it's no fun.
No, so, absolutely. And one thing that springs to mind is that within all this common law and court management challenge of presenting yourself in a common law jurisdiction with affidavits and conditional acceptances, the knowledge hurdle and the degree of precision that you're supposed to conduct yourself, and there are so many traps to fall into, that you have to have such a broad knowledge base in principles to walk this fine line of not allowing or recognizing jurisdiction of the judge in order to come out with a victory, if you like. It's so bloody difficult. It has been done, you know. There are some people who can do it, but it's just not achievable for the average person, I would say. All power to everyone that has had a court success. But my conclusion is there's no point in rolling that out to the general public, because most people just won't get it. I mean, I tried my hardest with all the knowledge I had. I went through a magistrate's court, you know, getting kidnapped, or, you know, they call it arrested and taken to magistrates. up to Crown Court and all this good stuff, and with a high degree of diligent studying over quite a few years. I obviously didn't say the right words, but I was trying to challenge jurisdiction, and they were playing a game of we're not listening, and ultimately it was just reasoned argument meets brute force.
It's futile. It's futile. I think some people fluke it. Occasionally someone will fall through the cracks and the judge can't be bothered and they'll let you go. But it's not repeatable consistently. So effectively it doesn't work, although it might now and again, on the odd occasion.
So, I can't help but conclude, Ben, and maybe you can comment on this, that the overall reaction is that we need to acknowledge what we're up against, i.e., tyrannical government, and we don't have any right to live for our own sake. We don't have property rights really anymore, and not much left of them. We're in pretty dire straits, and given that we can't run screaming to the common law or anyone that's going to tell you about private trusts, even, which is well worth knowing about, but it's not really a solution to anything, is it? What do you think?
Yeah, here's where I draw a distinction. I don't think we're up against the government. I think we're up against the enforcers. I think we need to personalize it to the actual police who are willing to enforce this stuff, because it's socially acceptable to be an enforcer. And we focus on the government doing this stuff to us, and yet generally we have the sentiment that it's socially acceptable to be an enforcer. And I think we need to start thinking along those lines. It needs to become socially unacceptable to be an enforcer and personalize it, because they get away with it. The police get away with it, and because part of their job, I always say, they perform two roles. They perform a moral role and an immoral role. They do come and rescue you from emergencies when you've been sort of you're in a car crash or you've been mugged or something. That's the moral role, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they got a dual role. They also enforce law. But because they do the two jobs, it's very confusing, and everybody has the sense that the police are necessary, and there's this uncomfortableness with complaining about them, because we know that they will come and rescue us in an emergency, and so we kind of feel that they're essential, and it's not right to complain about them. But this is where clarity, and distinctions are power. I say no, they do two jobs. One of them's moral, one of them's immoral, and it should be socially unacceptable. And this is how I think we got to start looking at it.
Yeah, there is a point to that. We have to also remember, of course, that you can start to bring in foreign troops who are disconnected culturally from the local population, and that is a technique that has been used throughout history before, and could easily be used again. But we're not at that stage, as you say. It's more sort of softly herding a bunch of idiots that aren't questioning anything into a big cage. So there aren't any sort of cattle prods out yet. There's no nasty techniques to be seen anywhere yet, because people are so stupidly compliant and rolling up their sleeves and getting vaccinated willingly. There's really no need. Any controller, would be rubbing his hands together thinking, this is fantastic. All the farm animals are really, really, behaving themselves today. They're all, no need for the sheepdog. So that, I think that's where we're at. Again,
did it ever cross your mind? Have you ever had the thought, maybe Bill Gates is actually doing us a favor and getting rid of all the idiots,
I have entertained that thought, and obviously that is a consequence. I think that ignorance is a choice in this sort of information age, and lack of knowledge is just too dangerous. To be in a situation where you don't know what to do these days, it's just too dangerous. It's a matter of life and death. It's a matter of having grandchildren and a genetic line or not, which is life or death for your family line.
I got to be honest, Nigel, I think that the idea, when you start learning about common law and that you might have some legal power to push back against the government, it does appeal to our desire for freedom and individual sovereignty. I think it also appeals to our ego and our desire for power a little bit. I don't know if you remember that moment when it suddenly hits you like, wow, law is voluntary, so if I don't consent, then I don't have to do as I'm told, and the possibilities are just mind-blowing, aren't they? I'm not going to have to pay tax, I'm not going to have to do all this shit, and so it's a very seductive proposition, isn't it? And I think probably that's why many of us get into it. And
there was also, if I can just interject there was a high number of people who were within that movement who are seeking solutions due to, getting out of debt, or for, arguably you could make a case for, these people were trying to dodge some responsibility or some consequences. So using the idea of, money created out of nothing by the banksters swapping, paperwork with governments and so forth, on the back of that idea, trying to claim their own equivalent of a free lunch. We know that there are parasites running the money-making system already, but it seems that a lot of these people in the Freeman movement were similarly, in my view, trying to escape responsibility in some way rather than face it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think a lot of people that get into it, myself included, in a bit of a financial mess at the time and kind of nothing to lose. And, why not give it a go? I've got nothing to lose. I'm in a mess. If I can write some letters and somehow get out of this debt, it does appeal. And also there's an excitement about it. There is an excitement about it. There's a buzz and there's a sense of community, because if if you're getting to know other people that are into there's a kind of club to it, isn't there? And
yeah.
I think with a lot of social justice crusades, rightly or wrongly, I think the social and the bonding and the union aspect to it is what probably most people are in it for, I think. You know what I mean? So there's that as well.
And there are also, sort of bandwagon jumpers on every movement as well, aren't there? And if it seems to be, the latest rebel cause, some followers will inevitably not necessarily be the intellectual vanguard of the movement.
I was performing a reporter role, similar to you are. You're interviewing people, and there's nothing wrong with that. Let's hear the information, let's hear what people have got to say. So yeah, I'd say 80% I was in a reporter podcast interviewer kind of role. A little bit, you always end up expressing your own opinions as well, so you end up in a bit of a teacher role as well. But I think that does bring us on to a good point, because I noticed there's people out there that are selling packages of paperwork. They're selling courses that are quite expensive. I've seen some, and I think I don't like to see that kind of annoys me, because I think they're taking advantage of people. And I remember me and you went on a course. I don't know if you remember, up in Manchester. Do you remember?
Yeah, that was what was it? The Creditors and Commerce, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm not going to name their names, but I think it's good to explore ideas. It's good for people to explore this stuff and to test it. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But there's definitely some predatory people that I think are probably in it for their own ego. And the trouble is, it's very easy to take advantage of gullible, desperate people that need a solution, like we were saying a few minutes ago. And there are people taking advantage of that, and I don't like to see that. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, no, I do agree that for the simple reason that I don't think the technology is a solution. We're up against the brute force of the state here, and people need to realise that. And it doesn't matter if you make a rational case, because a rational case will just be swept aside. And that is the massive alarm bell. That is, when a reasoned argument cannot penetrate or deflect an act of government, and that's a really serious situation. But that is where we are. So for the real basic fact that this is a non-solution, I don't think it's a good idea to be selling these courses. But on the other hand, I think there is good information to be learned. I think the whole idea of studying civics and what your rights are and are not, what are benefit privileges, learning about the public and the private, these sort of distinctions, learning about your name in commerce, contracts, all of these things are it's really useful education, and it's probably a gaping gap in most people, the average education. So I think there's a lot of validity in knowing these things, because we need to know how free we're not. We really need to appreciate this commercial sea out there and how it works. And even those of us who I think who've looked at the things that you and I have in the common law movement and the free man movement, you're looking at liens and so forth, and trusts. I mean, there's such complicated subjects. We've only sort of scratched the surface, but most people could really do with an education in this sort of stuff. But again,
and it can only come from alternative education sources, because the government is never going to teach that government rules by force. They're only going to fob you off in the government schools, aren't they? They're only going to tell you, oh yeah, they're going to aggrandize the idea of democracy. Oh, we're ruled by consent. We vote. We opt in, and we don't really, because there's no opt out. So it's like, in fact, I find it ridiculous when people say we're policed by consent. I have no idea what that means. Like, how on earth are we policed by consent? Like, how do I revoke my consent? You can't, effectively.
Yeah, and I think this is part of the myth that speaks back to the fact that we've never been free. And I think it's important to remember that the United States is the only country in history ever to have been born in freedom, in as much as the citizens were deemed to be at the top, the individual, and government was explicitly there to serve the individual. That's the power inversion, which is now toppled. It obviously isn't like that anymore, but that was, a massive spark of freedom in human history. But it hasn't occurred here in England. We've always been relatively free in Europe, but we've not really experienced complete freedom. And my experience 10 years ago or so, where the government actually said, no, you can't live on your own land, even though you own it, or own in inverted commas, because obviously if you can't do what you want with something, then who the hell does own it? Because you don't. And ultimately, if you can't own land on this island or this land of your nation, if you can't buy land and just live on it without the government granting permission, then you're clearly not free. And if you further look at taxation and the huge tax burden that you have no choice over, we're slaves, really, and that has to be grasped. I think that really is an important coordinate.
Yeah. I think that there's a kind of emotional grieving process. I think at first it's difficult to accept, because we've been taught all our lives that we're free, democracy, consent, blah, blah, blah. But then to arrive at that realization that actually we're not, I think there's some emotional resistance there for a lot of people. It's quite a tough, it's a bitter pill to swallow, and but I think the truth will always set you free. So you're better. It's just like an alcoholic or something. The first step is you got to accept, like we got to accept we're not free. That's the first step. You can't kid yourself. And this is what bugs me, I sometimes just want to shake people. I say, look, we're not free. All right, we're not total slaves. We're not literally in chains, but to a certain extent, we are slaves. We don't have choice. So I think the first step is acceptance, and then perhaps I think the solutions will come easier then.
What's that saying? Is it von Goethe? There are none more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe that they're free. And it is a really important first grasping. It's as important as grasping that we live in a world or an age of ubiquitous propaganda. Again, I've had conversations recently with seemingly intelligent people who still believe everything the BBC says. They haven't grasped that they're being lied to in the mainstream narrative, in the mainstream media. And for anybody, I'm sure most people listening here have already grasped that. But there are a lot of people out there, too many, I fear, that still haven't grasped that we're being lied to. And this is like, come on, these are the people that haven't even begun to realize that they're not free. They wouldn't think for a moment they're not free. But yeah, that's another alarming thing that doesn't buoy me up in these times of alleged pandemic.
I purged a lot of the people I didn't want in my life about 5 years ago, when Trump ran for election, when he announced he was running in 2015. And I was surrounded by radical lefty social justice warriors, because I was in the circus community and the yoga community and the performing arts. They're all raving lefties, right? So, but I didn't realize this at the time. I didn't totally understand this left, right. I didn't understand how crazy they are. Anyway, as soon as Trump announced he's running for president, everyone went mental around me. And it was like, whoa, all my friends are nuts, and it was quite difficult for me at the time, because I was surrounded by these maniacs. And then over a period of years, I slowly extracted myself from that community. And I thought, right, I need to be around more level-headed people. I want to be around more sort of business people. And so I moved to Wales and made a fresh start. And I already fortified all my relationships, all my friendships. Everyone's solid around me. And so when COVID came along and the vaccines and all the propaganda, like I was already on steady ground, if that makes sense. But I think a lot of people experienced, people in their lives, are on the other team and they got radically different views. And it's very difficult when people in your family, perhaps even your partner, or people close to you are on the other team. That's difficult stuff to deal with.
It is, isn't it? It's been a divisive time, because whereas in the past you could, have person A who believes that 9/11 was an inside job and person B who didn't, and those people could still sort of interact in many other ways without that difference actually blocking their interactions. But now I find, if I'm person A and I don't buy into the alleged narrative, I can't talk to someone seriously who does. And almost, you say you had a purge of friends 5 years ago. Well, this episode has purged quite a few for me. And I find now, Ben, I just I don't have anything to do with those people, because I'd have nothing to say, because I need to speak from a world where there's no pandemic into other listenings where there's other people that know there's no pandemic, that there's a political agenda, and that difficulty, I can't speak to them effectively.
I feel like we're starving for like critical thinking. Like I'm happy for people to present evidence that contradicts my worldview. That's fine.
Yes.
But it's so rare that anybody actually has a sensible conversation, isn't it? People just seem to just repeat sound bites that they heard on the news. And I was chatting about a friend. People are literally hypnotized, not kind of hypnotized, not sort of like hypnotized. People are literally hypnotized with hypnotic suggestions from the TV. It comes out of the screen, it goes into their brain, and that's it. There's no double checking, no rationality.
I despair when I look around me and I see the number of unquestioning people, people that are just in whatever trance that they're in, but they haven't got to a point where they're asking themselves, what the flip am I doing? What is going on? And they seem to have, most people, this is what I find quite alarming, is most people seem to be entrenched with their head in the sand. They seem to be, in my experience, most of the people I know are committed evaders, non-thinkers that actually would rather you don't trouble them with any more of that pesky evidence.
And what I've noticed is people that are willing to dig for the truth are comfortable speaking in detail. How many people have died? Sort of how full are the hospitals? How full are they usually? And then what I've noticed, people that have got a foggy relationship with the truth, they don't like details. If you start to query people, like, how do you know that? How many people have, they almost have an allergic, like a vampire under sunlight. They have an allergic reaction to details. They want to, I've noticed they sort of lurk in vague language, and they'll describe, instead of quantifying things in figures, they'll describe things. The pandemic is serious, is unprecedented. It's all these descriptive words
designed to emote. Designed to emote.
And when people start with me, I want the specifics. Like, okay, sort of how many people usually die of a heart attack? How many people did die of a heart attack? And it's okay not to know the answers. But if you don't know the answers to these questions, then what is your certainty based on? There's a mismatch between certainty. Certainty should be matched with knowledge. And if you don't have the knowledge, that's okay, but then you shouldn't be acting so certain about it. And there's very often a mismatch.
I think it's noticeable that in the mainstream narrative and all those who spout it and repeat it, that it's full of bland assertions. It's full of emoting. There is no reasoned argument, because there are so many issues within the mainstream narrative, such as the climate emergency, which you can pick apart. If children doing a week's project at school could pick the whole argument apart easily. And it's the same with viruses and with false flag terrorism attacks, and you could just go on and on. You could investigate the banking system. Most people are ignorant of how to construct and how to recognize a rational argument. It just isn't in people's intellectual arsenal. It's not in their psychological know-how. People are fundamentally scuppered in that their education has left them crippled, and they can't follow a reasoned argument. They can't require a reasoned argument because they're I don't know, education has been labeled as anti-conceptual in the past, and modern education is all about disembodied disparate pieces that aren't integrated in any meaningful whole. So yeah, there's a huge gap in people's education, which leaves them unable to even bring in any statistics or facts to build a reasoned argument. But it is the people, the investigators, people that are, pointed at and called deprecating names, conspiracy theorists, the people with their detective hats on, who are doing the thinking, can usually reproduce some kind of intellectual argument based on reason, evidence, logic, and proof. But the mainstream narrative doesn't have that. It isn't in there because it can't be, because it's actually wrong. And all it contains is these fluffy, emotive phrases, which you hear people you hear people say in the absence of a reasoned argument.
I'm going to switch the topic up, Nigel, if you don't mind. And I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about cryptocurrency.
I think they're a big opportunity at the moment. I'm not convinced whether they're a tool of freedom or a tool of enslavement, but whichever they are, they're a means for people to generate some wealth and some assets for themselves at the moment. I recognize that there's possibly a challenge getting crypto wealth out of the crypto sphere and into the real world, because that's where wealth really ultimately exists. But I think it's very exciting times, Ben. It's great, and a lot of people out there. There's an opportunity for ordinary people like you and me. If you've got a spare few £100, even, there's money to be made, and it's that in itself is an opportunity. And then who's behind it and where's it going and all the other things, and the cashless society implication, obviously, we will shortly be in a cashless society, and I see that as a bad thing. Are cryptocurrencies feeding into that? Yes, clearly they're probably part of the plan, I expect.
I don't like it as an investment because the volatility worries me. Like, I don't know if it's going up or going down. Of course, it might go up over the long run. Do we really know? I don't feel comfortable with it as an investment, but in terms of blockchain technology and the solutions that can provide, the decentralization of power, I think, it's going to be really interesting to see all the different uses that gets applied to. Personally, I don't have any crypto because I'm just not comfortable with it. But once it stabilizes, it's going to be interesting, to see how we can use it.
I think there's a lot of ideas being tested at the moment, and they're looking for systems that everyone can have on their app, and it involves currency exchange and all sorts of other stuff. Something will come out as a front runner, and this is being developed at the moment, with all of these cryptocurrencies and apps and technologies and systems and so forth. And I think that's part of what is going on in the unfolding of the political agenda towards greater control. I think this is actually what's going on in the crypto market, but it is an opportunity still to as I said, to generate some wealth. But will it be a good thing in the long run? If it's retained by government, if it's in the control of government and it's not genuinely a free market, then it's bad news. If things like Monero, PivX, MadeSafe, and other privacy coins can exist in a private crypto sphere, well then bingo, and it really does come down to economic freedom, because either there's economic enslavement if it's a controlled currency, or it's a free market. And if it's a free market, that would be great news. I'm not sure.
Here's another topic. Here's a curveball for you. Okay. I don't know what you think about this. I've noticed more and more news pieces talking about UFO disclosure over the last year or two. Now, when mainstream news channels are talking about something, I can't help but think they're up to something. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I'm very amused to hear UFO stories. I've been curious to follow the BBC and their reporting on the Mars rover, from January through February, and now there's even talk just recently about reviving moon operations and stuff. And you start to hear this on the BBC, who are known liars, and you start to think, I wonder what's coming down the pipe.
I think they're up to something.
I think you're right. I think they're absolutely up to something. It wouldn't surprise me to see some outing of some sort of extraterrestrial threat, because it would be consistent with the desired existential threat that we're being, the fear mongers use on us all the time. So if it isn't terrorism, if it isn't the climate, now it's a scary virus. And it always requires us to act as one, and quick, we need a leader, and now we've got to do this globally. And of course, defending the planet would be the ultimate, ticket for global union, which is where they want to, even to propaganda towards thinking about, even if it, even if they don't need to, or I'd say they don't even need to, because the pandemic card is so good that's ushered in, global communism already. We're not seeing the resistance, but if they needed to, if there was any crack in that, if reason managed to pervade and enough people said, where's the virus? Then they could play a ridiculous card like that. I could see that happening. And, with holograms and light shows in the sky. We're in an age of deep fake videos, for Christ's sake, Ben. How easy would it be for them to visually show us an alien invasion?
Absolutely. Yeah, perfectly said. I completely agree. And, anybody who's been following alternative conspiracy stuff for any amount of time, I probably have been for, let me think. I think I first started getting interested in conspiracy topics around about 2004, 2005, somewhere around there, because somebody introduced me to 9/11, questioning 9/11, and after that, I was down the rabbit hole then. And for as long as I can remember, I've been hearing people say they're going to stage a fake alien invasion eventually. That's always been a talking point. And up until this last year, I took everything with a pinch of salt. But seeing out the rapid acceleration and the quickening of everything that's happened over the past 12, 18 months, it would not surprise me in the slightest for them to do that.
Yeah. I think the degree to which the public is fooled is quite unbelievable, because, I think there's huge question marks over the moon landings. And I know that, some might immediately dismiss me for this. And even the concept of space travel through rocket propulsion technology specifically, I'm not denying that it would be possible through other means. But there are so many holes. And only looking at false flag terrorism, looking at the pattern of deception, it's just, it's so obvious to anyone that's prepared to just scrape a little beneath the surface, isn't it?
Now, I've asked you this before, but I'll ask you again, just for people that are new, that haven't heard before. You're a pilot. You've been a pilot all your life. As a pilot, is the Earth flat?
I would say, even from the perspective of not being a pilot, the Earth, that's just a nonsense idea that the Earth's flat. It contradicts so much of what we know, and I would say that certainly it isn't from my experience as a pilot. But we don't even need experience as a pilot to know that so many fundamental theories and explanations, so much of our knowledge rests on the globular model of the planet. Projectiles, weather, Coriolis force, gravity, that you could go on and on. So many things are explained adequately, consistently, and in an integrated, non-contradictory sum. So many things are explained by the globular theory. And you'd have to rethink everything to accommodate the nonsense of the flat earth theory. And then you find ultimately that they say that the flat earth was created by a supernatural being anyway. There is no theory of how it originated. So it's just nonsense from start to finish. And I think it's there as a red herring to pull people off into an eddy of distraction for really unthinkers that can't grasp the absolutely ridiculous. And it just pulls them off into an eddy of ineffective time wasting for however many years.
Yeah, it's a good example of how people will fall prey to nonsense because they're looking for something to belong to.
Yeah.
And it's a good lesson, you know. Yeah. It's a trap.
Yeah, and just to pick up my earlier thread as well, I mean, with the history of things like space travel, with the history of false flag terrorism, with the history of, you know, AIDS, with the history of, you know, for first SARS, and with BSE and all of the things that, lost my thread again. That's so annoying. Yeah,
on the moon.
Got it. With the fact that they've got the public on board with so many issues, and even climate change, this is a massive coup. So it's as though the public are ripe to just believe anything that the story. Where does the story want to go next? How ridiculous could we make it go? The public will still follow, because I would say 90% of the public out there will believe what the government say, and it doesn't matter. And they're probably having fun making it as more and more ridiculous. And that's another reason why space alien attacks, I think, could be likely, because I mean, this seems absurd enough to me. I don't know what you think, Ben, but when I walk around, I see people driving wearing masks and people walking around the streets in masks, and think, don't you realize that you're being hoodwinked? It's tragic that so many people don't know that they're being conned. Oh, I don't know.
In a weird twist of positivity, I find I've made loads of new friends over the last 12 months. Most of them online, admittedly, on Facebook and stuff. But I feel like my bonds with friends now who are like-minded and on the same page are so much stronger now than they were before. You know,
yeah.
Even though the world's divided, I don't know if you feel about this. I feel a lot more community at the moment.
Well, that's good. I mean, you know, if you've benefited in some way from finding those people and connecting with them in a way, I mean, that is just fantastic. I haven't hugely grown my social circle through this time, but I've had a great many conversations with interesting people. But amongst my sort of small personal circle, I've found it an absolute lifeline to be surrounded by rational people who are similarly evidence demanding before they jump to silly conclusions that contradict their whole life's experience. and I find it so grounding. And you know, we've had so many illegal gatherings, dare I say it. You know, we're not going to be frightened into dehumanizing ourselves. You know, when you see absurd images of babies being born into plastic and people hugging each other through plastic, and you think, how insane can you get? How long does it take people to realize that, you know, our humanity is being taken away from us?
Yeah. I never once paid any attention to any of the lockdown rules. Like I must have, through the whole, because I live in Wales now, as you know, I probably went across the Severn Bridge about 40 or 50 times. I went all over the country. It didn't even cross my mind to stay put. And but you know, speaking to people, some people think the borders are closed, like as if there's like military guards on the borders or stopping and checking people. There's not at all. You know, I mean, they could do that if they wanted to, but you know, seeing as they don't, I've just ignored it. You know.
Yeah. Well, good for you, because I mean, I think that it's a necessary component of the solution is civil disobedience, but it's sadly lacking. And I found through my experience of visiting some of the marches last year, you know, there just isn't the response. I don't see the response required to slow the tide of tyranny. When I look around in the society I'm in, I just looking around and think everyone's bloody swallowing it here, you know. And it makes me so alarmed. It makes me start to think about leaving soon, because I see it as getting pretty bloody serious. And yet all around me are unthinkers.
Oh, so sorry, I saw your post regarding that. You were thinking of going somewhere. So where are you at with that?
Well, no conclusions other than thinking about contingency plans to, you know, if if we're going to face sort of gulags and detainment centres and quarantines, if we're going to be, you know, second-class citizens because we're unvaccinated, if we're going to be the unclean, if we're going to be unable to enjoy so many social benefits, if we're going to be gently squeezed until we get vaccinated, or just continually inconvenienced until we do, I don't want to raise my children in a world like that. So it just makes me think, shit, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not sure. At the moment, I'm just thinking, what's coming? And you know, do I want to be here when it hits? Because sometimes you can, if you can see a little bit further, if you can see consequences better than others around you, it's kind of scarier. You know, you kind of get an early warning system.
It did cross my mind to go to Poland because I think they're relatively conservative and nationalistic and libertarian. I think. I mean, I don't know, but it definitely crossed my mind.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if I zoom out all the way, Ben, I think that in the long term, our whole Western culture is going in a statist trend. And that's when we talk of, is it a left, right, or partisan issue? It is a move to the left because, you know, you start in sort of liberal democracies, you slide into socialism, you know, you get into communism before you know it. And it's just the state taking more and more control. And I think ultimately that's coming to our whole civilization, and probably, you know, who knows where we'll be able to move to escape the tentacles of the state. Maybe that's a bit of a, you know, a drastic, grim view for some listeners, but I think that's realistic. And when I think of coming out the other side, I imagine, you know, hopefully my children will have children, and they will sort of see it out the other end of the tunnel after all this insanity's passed over, and it could probably take decades. so I'm not really a happy bunny to talk to really about, you know, prognosis of what the future may hold, because I'm sort of preparing for the worst.
Yeah, it's important to be realistic. I agree. You know, some people do. It's comforting just to say, oh, everything will be all right. But it might not be, you know. And also, what I find bizarre, the way people talk is as if nothing terrible's ever happened in history. It's like you'd think all the bad stuff has happened and it can never happen again. And I think, hang on a minute, there's been plenty of real bad stuff happened in history, and it was perpetrated by humans and not that long ago. What on earth makes people so confident that, you know, that big scale terrible stuff couldn't happen again? There's like
absolutely,
there's like some kind of hopeful bias, like a bias, like a,
yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, false, or just forgetting the history that, you know, we shouldn't let repeat. But yeah, I saw this great meme recently. What you're saying about the just looking back to what happened in Nazi Germany, a meme that all of these things and Mussolini and Hitler, everything was legal. Everything they did was legal and sort of voted in. I mean, it just, we have to remind ourselves of that shocking fact that it was just, oh my goodness, you know, we've got these tyrants that are murdering people. How do we see that coming? You know, and it's, as you say, it's happened before in so many places around the world. There've been, you know, from Soviet Russia, Pol Pot, it's just, it goes on and on. But
and something I think you could be really helpful. I hear a lot of people talking about, right, we need to get some land, we need to get a farm, we need to grow our vegetables, we need to live together, and you know, I'm fully in support of that. Is there anything practical that you can offer to people as somebody who has lived on your own land? Is there any sort of words of guidance that you can give?
Well, I mean, other than advocating land ownership, which I've been doing for some years, I'd recommend that anybody invest in land, because, you know, ultimately it's the ultimate solar panel. You know, you can grow your food on it, you can dig a well, you can raise livestock on it, you can live from it. If you've got a piece of land, you can live. It's really that fundamental. Unfortunately, with the planning system, particularly here in England, you've got a bit of an obstacle because, you know, and you've got to play ridiculous games about what you can do on the land and when you can be there and why. And you've got hoops to jump through, unfortunately, but at least it's a head start. And if you can get a piece of land that's supporting you with food and water, I'd always recommend that. I think the solution lies outside of urban areas for sure. I think it's time to run to the hills, and you know, they won't want us in agricultural land. Agenda 21 already clearly illustrates that, trying to herd us into, you know, population zones, and that would be a nightmare. It would be, for me, living in a you know, dense urban situation would be unthinkable. I'm.
And when are we going to see the next event? You know, I know you had like your mini festival. Are you planning on?
No, I mean, these uncertain times. I mean, I almost think, you know, I almost think it's almost too late for that. I think the political reality that's unfolding around me is so alarming that it's almost, you know, I couldn't justify spending attention doing that. It's time to sort of, you know, if we're thinking in metaphors and running to the hills, I'm reaching for my stuff, and I'm, you know, wondering what I should grab. You know, I'm literally at that place, and I know some people again might find that quite alarming, but I think that's the gravity of the real political situation that we face, and that when people think that this is all going to go away and the lockdown's going to be lifted and soon we'll be able to go on holiday just as soon as we've all been vaccinated 3 or 4 times, and it'll all be fine. And you know, that really is just wishful thinking, and there's no evidence that that's going to happen at all, and there's a lot of evidence that suggests things are going to get a lot worse. So yeah, not wishing to sound too you know, yeah, so I mean, by land, but it's almost a question of, you know, where, somewhere in Africa, somewhere South America.
Right. Yeah.
Where will the tentacles of the state not reach ultimately? Because it seems to me, Ben, that in the UK and America, it's probably going to be worst soonest. We're going to become more like China the most with track and trace. And I imagine would sort of filter out slowly. Other countries would jump on board with their degree of totalitarianism. I don't think it would necessarily lock down with you know, our loss of freedom would be total everywhere. But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I don't have a plan to leave the country, to be honest, but maybe, you know, maybe I am being naive. I don't know. You know, I'm in Wales at the moment, and even though the tentacles of the state can reach, you know, all over the UK, as you just said, you know, there's a lot of rural land here, and I've just you know, in this last year, got my first house, renovated it. I'm planning on sort of continuing as a property investor, and you know, I'll be on the lookout for land, farms, things that have got running water and rivers and streams. You know, I've got a lot of friends that are interested in buying, investing. So, you know, Excellent. From my point of view, you know, there's the possibility of doing some kind of project where several people come together, several people put money in. You know, it's
land with a water supply would be a real bonus. You know, and yeah, I'd really exciting. You can really open up possibilities of security, you know, physical security, if you got access to land, whether or not you can grow trees to produce stuff. You know, if it's poles just for fences or furniture, you've always got the ability to at least produce something from the land in a way that you haven't without. So I'd certainly advocate that.
Yeah, and Wales is relatively cheap. You know, you're in a much more expensive part of the country, but over here in Wales, you know, things are a quarter of the price. You know, so money goes a lot further. I mean, this house that I bought and renovated is a 3-bed terrace. It's 60 grand, 60. You know, I mean, you couldn't buy a bed sit in anywhere around London, could you, for that kind of price? Of course, it's more remote, you know, it depends on your circumstances. But yeah, you know, the money goes a lot further in Wales. So yeah, you know, I'm quite excited. I'm optimistic on that side of things. I think there's some exciting stuff that can be done.
Absolutely. Well, it is a time for people to, you know, keep the rational conversation going, and to, you know, if there are any people that we know that can be educated or conversed with in any meaningful shape or form, you know, we should really keep these conversations going. But things have been slightly complicated by, you know, stories and rumors of vaccinated people possibly being a threat to the unvaccinated. I don't know if you've heard much about that, Ben.
Oh, is this the shedding? Yes.
Yeah, well, the whole idea that contact with a vaccinated person could cause symptomatic reaction of any kind with an unvaccinated. This is
I mean, I hope that's not true, because we really are living in a zombie world then, aren't we? We've seen so many zombie movies where the zombie sort of bites the person, and then that person turns into a zombie. And if that is true, then I don't know where to go from there. We're screwed,
No, absolutely. Anyway, I didn't want to turn the conversation down into a pessimistic view. You're talking about positive things. What else do you see as the solution for people, Ben? We've cautioned against this common law. What else can we leave people with? I mean, are you a fan of petitions?
Well, I'm not a fan of political action, because it's just trying to go to the state, trying to use the government to create more change. I don't think that's the route to go down. I don't bother signing petitions. I mean, I like that guy. What's his name? The musician that's running. He was running for mayor. I forgot his name. The sort of ginger-haired guy. Do you know what I mean? Somebody Fox, I think.
No, I think I know who you mean, but I can't remember his name.
Yeah, it's encouraging. Yeah, he was speaking relative sense, even though he's sort of wants to get into a position of political power So I think, if you want my opinion, I think what people are doing, I think grassroots is good. Coming together is good. Community, building that grassroots stuff is the way to go. That's the world I want to see. I think we got to let go of the idea of government is going to solve problems. Just expecting more government, more law to solve problems is never going to happen. People need to let go of that, and so that's one thing that bothers me. I think people need to let go of that and look towards direct community as the way of creating change.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of individual action, really, or some people might call it direct action, but just doing what you need to in your own rational self-interest, and not really asking for permission with it, and of course not aggressing against anybody else in any shape or form, according with that non-aggression principle we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. You've just got to get on with things, haven't you? And as you say, recognize that it's stop groveling or stop demanding that government help. Try and get into that mindset of solving our own problems. I think that's really part of the solution, isn't it? Ben, anything last minute stuff you wanted to say, or did you want to let listeners know where they can hear a little bit more about you or contact you?
Yeah, sure. I live in South Wales, and I haven't been here long, so I'm trying to meet more people in the alternative communities. I am going to be doing a regular podcast now that I've set up my kind of studio and cameras and stuff like that. So if people want to follow my page online, the Ben Lowrey page, they'll be able to follow along with what I'm doing. Some of it will be, there's a lot of overlap, I think, with some of the topics we cover. I'm going to be focused a little bit more on property investing, because that's a topic I'm interested in. So people might be interested in that as well. But I think everyone should keep up the good work in the grassroots communities, and keep building local connections like that.
Thanks ever so much for your time, Ben. Really appreciate you sharing your perspective and sort of joining in on that, I don't know, what should we call it, cautionary approach for people that are contemplating common law solutions.
Yeah, and if anybody's in a mess, and they've got problems with the law and fines and stuff, they're welcome to message me. I mean, I might not be much help, but I can at least sort of encourage them to not make it any worse for themselves.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that. Well, thanks everybody for listening. I do encourage you to visit the website, lawfulrebel.com. There's stacks more there on current issues to do with the pandemic, and also techniques of how to find truth and stuff. So check that out. And thank you for listening, and join me again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.